Okay, I have a little bit of a different one this afternoon. Got an older 99 Yukon 5.7 V8. Same as Suburban. We worked on this vehicle about 9 or 10 months ago for another shop where they diagnosed a problem with the anti-theft, and they replaced PATS. Well, GM doesn't call it a PATS module, I don't think. Yeah, they replaced the anti-theft module, and they couldn't get it programmed to where it would recognize the keys, and we were able to program it, get it running. And so the owner of the vehicle shows up today, and he says, well, my vehicle's doing the same thing it was doing before that you guys worked on it. And of course he didn't go back to the original shop that sent it here. He came over here. And so I said, well, what exactly is it doing? And you know, they like to say it's the same thing. And he said, well, it'll crank but won't start, and if you spray starting fluid in the air cleaner area, it'll crank and run. I says, okay, well, we'll just have to check it out, because I reminded him that, you know, all we did was program the module that the other shop supplied and got it up and running. So we'll check and see if it's the same thing. Maybe the module's gone bad, maybe it's a wiring issue. And so I brought the scanner out and to do a system scan, and right off the bat we had no communication with the engine controller, the engine computer. And so I'm like, okay, well, that's why it's not running. So then I come over here to the fuse box, and this ECM1 excuse me, the ECM1 fuse 20 amp was blown. So I took and put my my pulser in here. Of course, the battery was also dead as a doornail. I had to put my jump box on there. And I've showed this tester. It's a Blue Point. I've had it for years. I love it because it has the different adapters for different circuits that you can hook right, and it's also fused. It's got a big fuse in there, but it'll go from 0 to 50 amps. And basically you hook the adapter to put it in the fuse box there, and then the other wire goes just to a good ground, and you turn it on, and you can adjust it for whatever the amperage of the fuse. And this was a 20 amp fuse. And then when you push down on this button, this little dot will in the bottom right corner will light up, and that will tell you you got there we go. And so it's power going through there. Right now we have no current going through there. It's 0. It'll give you the amperage reading on the top there, and the bottom is what you got it set to. And once it hits that 20 amps, it'll come up, this top reading will just pulse. It'll say pulse. Well, when I first did this, it pulsed immediately. As soon as I turned it on, it pulsed. So it was a dead short. So then I pulled a wiring schematic, and we did a power distribution to see what all's on that ECM1 fuse. And we found out that all the fuel injectors, hopefully you can see that, all the fuel injectors, the ignition coil, they're calling it a vehicle control module, which is the ECM. Then down here you have the crankshaft position sensor and the ignition control module, and these are fuel injectors. There's 8 fuel injectors. So I decided to unplug the crank position sensor first, because the engine computer's right here, and you can see the wire, and there's nothing rubbing or anything. So once I unplugged the engine control, the crankshaft position sensor, boom, my short went away. It did just like it's doing now. It just showed no current, but it wasn't pulsing anymore. So I'm like, okay, do I have a bad sensor, or do I have, because it comes up the side of the engine on the right side there behind the alternator, and comes up between like the alternator and the exhaust manifold. And I says, and it kind of wraps around a bracket, which I didn't think was factory, but somebody wrapped it around a bracket. So I unlooped it from the bracket and I plugged it back into the crank sensor, and I still had no short. It did not pulse anymore, but it would not crank and run the car either. So I decided to disconnect. There's two sensors. There's a power steering pressure switch, I think it is, and then the crank sensor, and there's a ground wire. So I pulled the whole harness up out of there, and look what I found. It had gotten against the exhaust manifold, and that was dead short to the manifold. And when I unplugged the sensor, it must have moved it enough to where it wasn't touching the manifold anymore. But had it cranked and ran, I'm going to guess that wire's probably broken in there now. But had it cranked and run, once it got hot again, it would have shorted out again, and it would have stopped. So it just goes to show you, a lot of shops would have just replaced the crank sensor and called it a day, although I don't know if it would have ran or not, because when I plugged the sensor back in, it did not run. But I never checked for spark, but I'm assuming it had no spark. But the other thing that is kind of irritating is the customer says it's doing the same thing. You spray starting fluid in the air cleaner and it'll run. Well, there's no way it could run. It may have been doing that originally 10 months ago when he brought it in. He's just assuming that it was doing the same thing, so that's what he said. So I know that without power going to that crank sensor, we weren't, and it also powers up the fuel injectors, so without the it also powers up the ignition coil and the ignition control module, so there's no spark with that fuse blowed. And so there's no way that he was being truthful to me. So it's just kind of aggravating when the customer lies and says, you know, like I'm not going to know. and I've always been, if it was something that I did, when I found, say I had that wire out and I rerouted it when I had it out, which I didn't, but just say I did, maybe we put an engine in this thing or something. Well, I'd stand behind it and say, that's my fault, I'm going to cover it, and I'd probably reimburse them for the towing and everything. But it's just aggravating when somebody lies to you and tries to say, you know, when all I did was program the anti-theft module so that the thing would crank and run, and he's been running it for 10 months since we worked on it. But in his mind, it's not running, and it didn't run before, so it's the same problem. But he said that it was doing the same thing as far as they can spray starting fluid in there, which I know beyond a shadow of a doubt there's no way that you wouldn't have had spark. I could see that this took down the fuel injectors, and had this fuse not powered the ignition coil and crank sensor and the ignition control module, yeah, they probably would have been able to, you know, run it on starting fluid, but there's no way he could do that. So it's just frustrating, but at least I know in good conscience I did the job correctly, and I'll have to pull this wiring harness apart and see how many wires is burnt up there and fix that, and rewrap it with some heat resistant tape, and make sure it's not touching the exhaust manifold. Most likely these connectors right here weren't in the holders where they're supposed to be, so it just was flopping around there. So anyway, I hope you enjoy this video, and we'll catch you on the next one.